Ladies and gentlemen, it's a day of joy and celebration for all of us because it was on this day, the 10th of September 1980, that Mangalore University was born. Since then, the university has walked for 34 years and today we are celebrating the 34th Foundation Day. Mangalore University has taken big strides in development and is marching on to become one of the premier institutions of higher learning. Starting from mere 5 postgraduate programs and a few colleges, today Mangalore University has got 26 PG departments offering 39 postgraduate programs, 26 PhD programs, and there are over 210 affiliated colleges and 5 autonomous colleges under Mangalore University. The university has collaborative research programs with over 15 national research centers like BRC, IGCAR, NSC, IISc, CFTRI, NAL, and so on. The research projects with an overlay of over 12 crores have been completed in the last 5 years, and projects with a funding of about 25 crores are in progress. Our university has also established national research facilities like the Microtron, the CARD, and many research equipments in different departments and FIRST labs have been purchased to carry on frontline research. Over the last few years, Mangalore University has established itself as a pioneer in the area of research fields like chemistry, radiation physics, biodiversity, folklore studies, and so on. Today, we are proud to say Mangalore University stands at the 24th position among the top 50 universities in the country. The Foundation Day celebrations of this year carry a lot of significance and joy because our university has been accredited with A grade by NAAC recently. Let us now begin the function by invoking the blessings of God, and I invite Mrs. Manjula Rao to lead us in prayers.
Palisu palisu Parvati Tanaya, Palisu Vigna Vinashaka Sadaya, Palisu palisu Parvati Tanaya, Palisu Vigna Vinashaka Sadaya, Palisu palisu Parvati Tanaya, Madhupuravasa Hridaya Vilasa, Namisu Vilambodara Bhayanasha, Palisu palisu Parvati Tanaya, Omkara Priya Ganapa Niranjana Pannaga Bhushana Nitya Prasanna Siddhi Vinayaka Shubhakara Dayaka Sakalabhyudaya Nido Ganapa, Omkara Priya Ganapa Niranjana Pannaga Bhushana Nitya Prasanna Siddhi Vinayaka Shubhakara Dayaka Sakalabhyudaya Nido Ganapa, Palisu palisu Parvati Tanaya, Palisu palisu Parvati Tanaya.
Every year, we celebrate the Foundation Day by inviting eminent personalities to deliver Foundation Day lecture. And in the past, we have had eminent scientists and personalities like Dr. R. Chidambaram, former Director BARC, Sri V.S. Malimat, former Chief Justice Karnataka and Kerala High Court, Dr. Jayant V. Narlikar, former Director Ayuka Pune, Professor C.N.R. Rao, Bharat Ratna, and former Director Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, Sri Girish Karnad, Fellow Sangeet Natak Academy, Bangalore, Sri Khurshid Alam Khan, former Governor of Karnataka, Professor B.K. Sinha, former Director, Sai Institute of Nuclear Physics, Calcutta, Professor P.K. Iyengar, former Member, Atomic Energy Commission, Dr. Raja Ramanna, former President, National Institute of Advanced Studies, Dr. K. Venkata Subramaniam, former Member, Union Planning Commission, Sri R. Rajamani, former Managing Director, MRPL, Mangalore, Rajashri, Dr. D. Virendra Hegde, Dharmadhikari, Dharmasthala, Dr. M. Veerappa Moily, former Union Minister for Law and Justice, Government of India, Professor H. A. Ranganath, former Director, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, Professor S. Ramanand Sethi, former Vice Chancellor, Rajiv Gandhi Medical University and presently the Vice Chancellor, Nitte University, and so on. And last year, we had Professor K. Chidanand Gowda, former Vice Chancellor Coimbatore University, who delivered the Foundation Day lecture. This year, to deliver the 34th Foundation Day lecture, we have amidst us a renowned scientist in solid-state physics, thin films and nanometer, Padma Shri Professor Kasturi Lal Chopra, the former director of IIT Kharagpur. I now request the Registrar Evaluation of our university, Professor B. Narayana, to welcome the gathering and introduce the dignitaries on the dais.
Good morning, everyone. Dignitaries on the dais, faculty members, supporting staff of the university, students, press and media friends, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to the function of Foundation Day Lecture 2014. First and foremost, I welcome Professor Kasturi L. Chopra, a renowned material scientist and former director of IIT Kharagpur, for making himself available for this function and to deliver Foundation Day lecture on the topic Nurturing Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Academic Institutions. After migrating from Pakistan, Professor Chopra obtained BSc Honours and MSc in Physics from Delhi University and PhD from University of British Columbia, Canada, under World University Fellowship. He worked in senior R&D positions for 17 years in different institutions in Canada, Germany, and USA. Then he joined IIT Delhi as senior professor and served the various senior academic positions as head and dean. Challenged by the offer of directorship of IIT Kharagpur, he served for 2 terms of 10 years as an exceptional case and turned the IIT around its premier place. After retirement, he served IIT Delhi as IREGA Chief Chair Professor in the area of solar energy. Presently, he is a distinguished honorary professor of several premier academic institutions and advisor, consultant to several industries. Professor Chopra has supervised 60 PhD students, authored, co-authored, edited 10 books, published over 430 research papers, held 5 US patents, and transferred 10 know-hows to industry in the areas related to thin films and nanometers. His first book, Thin Film Phenomena, published in 1967, is still considered as a Bible of the field for the students. He is known as father of thin films. He is the recipient of several awards, which include SS Bhatnagar Prize, Baba Award, Krishnan Aryabhatta and Mahalanobis medals, FICCI, Bashin and Roy Awards, Distinguished Scientist and Lifetime Achievement Awards for Solar Energy Society, Indian Vacuum Society and Materials Research Society of India, Lifetime Contributions Award in Engineering by Indian National Academy of Engineering and the ISI USA, Citation, Laureate Award for being one of the 8 most highly cited scientists of India, elected as Fellow of all Science and Engineering Academies of India. Professor Chopra has been confirmed Padma Shri by the Government of India for his contribution to science and engineering. I wholeheartedly welcome Professor Kasturi L. Chopra to this function, and I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir, to offer him a bouquet and welcome him florally. Our beloved Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir, is here with us as the President of today's program. Professor K. Bhairappa, a native of Mysore district, had his early education in Mysore and from University of Mysore with distinction, first rank and gold medal in MSc. He obtained PhD from Moscow State University, that is Russia, and also obtained diploma in Russian language, certificate in German and Japanese languages. He served the University of Mysore for 31 years in academic and various administrative positions. Professor Bhairappa is a renowned researcher in his field, and he has authored over 240 research publications in international journals, 30 books, chapters, reviews, edited 6 books, and authored a famous handbook of hydrothermal technology, published by Elsevier Publishers, UK, published in 2 editions. He is the editor-in-chief of British journal Materials Research Innovations, senior associate editor of Journal of Progress in Crystal Growth and Characterization of Materials from Elsevier Publisher, and editorial board member of 3 more international journals. Professor Bhairappa has more than 3,500 citations to his credit. He is known as a world authority in hydrothermal technology. He has traveled worldwide and visited over 56 countries and has delivered 72 keynote and invited lectures in various international conferences held abroad. Professor Bhairappa has guided 20 students for PhD, and currently 8 more students are working. He has been recognized as a PhD guide in physics, chemistry, microbiology, biotechnology, material science, earth science, and environmental science. He has been elected as Fellow World Academy of Ceramics and serving in several international committees and commissions related to crystallography, crystal growth, and material science. He is a recipient of Dr. Raja Ramanna Award for Science and Technology, Sir C.V. Raman Award, Materials Research Society of India Medal, Golden Jubilee Award of the University of Mysore, 2 times, Best Paper Award in an international conference held in Japan, established an active research collaboration with various international labs from Japan, Spain, UK, and USA. He has completed 15 major projects worth over 70 crores from UGC, DST, DRDO, DAE, and Ministry of Environment and Forest. He has also operated an international project of $1.2 million during 1998-2002, and he has trained many of his colleagues and students in Japan. He has assumed the office of Vice Chancellor of Mangalore University on the 5th of June 2014, and he has several innovative programs to carry Mangalore University to greater heights nationally and internationally. Sir, on behalf of all present here, I welcome you, sir, and request you, sir, to accept a floral welcome from Professor K. Chinnappa Gowda, our Dean, Faculty of Arts. I also welcome our Finance Officer, Professor Pakirappa, for this program. I request you to accept a floral welcome from Professor T.P.M. Pakala, our Dean, Faculty of Science and Technology. I also extend a warm welcome to friends from media who have been helping in highlighting the activities of our university. Finally, I welcome one and all present here to this function. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of all present here, I extend a warm welcome to Professor B. Narayana, and I request Professor Arabi, President, Mangalore University Teachers Association, to offer a bouquet to Professor B. Narayana. Thank you, sir. Let's now move on to the inauguration of this program. I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Bhairappa, to inaugurate the Foundation Day celebrations by lighting the lamp. I request the Chief Guest, Professor K.L. Chopra, and other dignitaries to join him. Are eagerly waiting to hear the 34th Foundation Day lecture. And as we all have heard, The chief guest of this function is a renowned scholar and an authority in solid-state physics and thin films. The list of awards and honors tell us how great a scientist and academician is Professor K.L. Chopra. With great pleasure, may I request you, sir, to kindly deliver the Foundation Day Lecture 2014.
We are a scientific civilization. The health and wealth of this civilization depends strongly on the power of knowledge. But the power of knowledge can be utilized only if we use knowledge through higher education. This is where the connection is between higher education and knowledge. But unfortunately, in our country, we have a lot of documents on education, starting from Radhakrishnan report to Kothari report to new education policy, the Knowledge Commission, and so on. In fact, some of the best documents ever written by a man in anywhere in the part of the world are our documents. We are the largest, one of the largest higher education system in the world. And yet, we are still groping in the dark to find that key to use the knowledge. We produce knowledge. Ironically, we produce a lot of knowledge. We have very intelligent people. There's no doubt about it. The world recognizes that. The world accepts that. As you can see here, many of our students who have gone abroad, from not only from IITs, from universities and so on, they have done more innovation, they have done more research publications than all of us put together in this country. Interestingly, we have some 150,000 engineers and scientists of our young scientists from our IITs, from your universities, working in many multinationals in Bangalore, and they produce more intellectual property, they produce more patents than all of our IITs and all our CSI labs put together. So there's something wrong. It is the same people in a different system are very productive. And yet, in our country, we spend as much as $4 billion on our research and development. Our output is much lower than the $4 billion we spend on our students who go abroad. This everybody knows, but as I said, we are still looking for, we think the documents will bring innovation. Documents will bring intellectual property rights. As I said, we still haven't found the way yet, and there is the reason for it, and that's one of the things that I want to talk about you. See, it's a sad story for a country of our size, that we have to go to a small country like Israel of 7 million people. We are 1.2 billion and they are 7 million people. We import 80% of our electronics for defense from Israel. Our agriculture universities, there are 40 of them, or 40 plus. They have not been able to produce a better rose in this country. We have to go to Israel to learn how to grow roses of global quality. This just gives you an idea. We spend 1,000 crores on nanotechnology. Nothing has come out of that. Not a single product has come out of that. So there's something wrong with the system. Not that we as people, maybe our education system is not as good, but yet we have very bright people. So let's see what is the problem there. If you look at higher education, the way it has evolved in the world, we are still stuck with the information-based teaching and learning. In fact, I call it broadcasting model. It's a massification, rote learning, degree process only, stamping out degrees. And mind you, this does not mean your university alone, it means also even IITs. We are more interested in educating as many people as possible, giving them as many degrees as possible. We continue with that. But the world has not accepted that, particularly in technical education. For the last over 12 years, there has been a battle going on between the world bodies, particularly what is called Washington Accord, people who have signed that agreement. They said, we do not accept Indian technical education standards. We will not allow your students to mobility in our institutions. So finally, they wanted a change, dramatic change from rote learning, from massification. They said you must go into what is called the outcome-based. Whatever you teach, it should have an outcome. You should learn, not be taught. And finally, after many years of negotiation, I've been involved in many of these areas. In fact, the documents have been written by us, but our government will not accept major changes, because they said if you have major changes, everybody will fail. Even the IITs will not succeed. But finally, we have made a compromise with the world, and now we have a system, and we are now in the process of what is called outcome-based learning. I don't know about your university, but you have no choice. If you want your students to be mobile, internationally, your faculty to be mobile, taken laterally, then you have to accept that system, and you have to go through that accreditation system. And that the government, the new government is also evolving, trying to evolve it, okay. But then the world has not sat there. The world is not sitting on just an outcome base. They've already moved on to another system. So there's a big gap already, and this I call knowledge power based. A system in which you learn by, say, ICT based technology anytime, anywhere. The education is anytime, anywhere. It's a convergent. It's nothing like an isolated silos of physics, chemistry, math or something. It's a convergent. It's the students have to decide. They want to learn chemical, they want to learn physics, or learn chemistry or biology, and how to combine them together. It's convergent. It's translational and transformational. That is, it should have some utility. What does it transform to? A new knowledge, or a new product, or a new process. That's what it has to do. And even more important, it should be innovational. It should be entrepreneurial. Just leaving there that knowledge has no meaning today. And finally, it should be value-based. It should be ethical. This is what the system today in major countries, when we talk of 200 universities, we say 200 universities are the world's global best universities, and none of our universities or IITs in that category. It is these 200 universities which are on knowledge-based today. And we have a long way yet to go on that. Okay, so university, New Age university is supposed to be what? I think Peter Drucker, the management people will know, the management guru, said many years ago, I think over a dozen years ago, he said, conventional universities are dead. If they are not dead, they are relics of the past. I think that's a very serious indictment on the education system, not only here, throughout the world. In fact, he predicted that. Okay. And he says, this should be a place for to learn, not to teach. A student comes to a university not to be taught, but he wants to learn. He wants to learn self-learning through interaction, technology, not by mass learning or rote learning. Okay. Not only that, he wants to learn, not just learn to do things. Learn to do things, learn to work with other people, learn to live with other people, learn to work for the society. This is what he's supposed to do. So essentially what students want today is, he wants to be in a university to learn what he wants to learn, when he wants to learn, and at what place, at what pace, and then what to do what he knows. That is the essence of today's those 200 universities. If we want to be one of those, we better adopt at least some parts of it, if not the whole thing. Okay, this is what is expected. So it's essentially higher education is there to nurture human capital as an agent of growth, of social good for a knowledge society. So you can see higher education, if it does that job, it is as important as primary education. And that's what the government of India has to recognize, that we want them to recognize. Yes, primary education is important. They always said higher education is not our business. But it is, because our economy depends on that. The society's growth depends on that. Okay. So I talked about knowledge power. So please allow me, I'm going to say something about the knowledge power, and then I'll come down to what should we be doing. Okay. Knowledge power of higher education through higher education consists of 4 components. First is obviously creation of research, creation of knowledge through research naturally, and that creates of course human resources. And the other is use that knowledge to innovate through research and development. And not only that, simply creating knowledge and simply showing how it can be used, that's not good enough. Most of our publications from our universities are only that. This great work, we are doing it because it will lead to new solar energy. Hundreds and thousands of papers are published in our country And they're so poor quality. They simply said, I'm using this material, I'm using this thin film solar cell because it will revolutionize, without understanding how will it revolutionize. Can you produce it? Can you produce it economically? Can you produce it on a large scale? That nobody asked this question yet. For a paper is okay. Unfortunately, the dumb University Grants Commission also accepts that for your promotion. And that's also wrong. They think it's important. So creation of wealth through intellectual property rights and entrepreneurship. From innovation, you have to go to entrepreneurship. Somebody has to translate that, and these are the entrepreneurs, okay? And of course, in doing all that, the purpose of higher education has to be that you have to, whatever you nurture, it should be eco-friendly, it should be holistic, and it should have inclusive development. But simply developing only for few people, for few industries does not help here. It has to be inclusive. Okay, I'm going to emphasize once again, particularly for young people who want to be an engineer, mechanical, chemical, or physicist, want to be a scientist or a nuclear scientist. Those days of these silos are gone, the boundaries are gone, and one has to understand that. So basically, we all put that under anything, any knowledge, any creation, new knowledge is science. I mean, that's the, and it's a power by itself. Science is by itself. Its dimensions are, like engineering is also part of that. I mean, we always think that as if that's a separate issue. Unfortunately, the engineers are the one who say, well, I don't want to learn physics, I don't want to learn chemistry, I want to learn engineering, because we teach them wrongly. They don't understand is the basic, the fundamentals of what they are. So engineering is, of course, a useful, valuable, efficient creation through innovative applications of that knowledge power. That's science. And of course, technology is a productive application of knowledge power. Not only that, we have all the humanities also, social sciences, they are also very important and integral part of this knowledge power. And we must accept that. Management and social sciences, they create knowledge from science of practice. I think the best example today is mobile telephones, okay. You can see they would have never been successful unless the society accepts that. Unless you get those applications which are useful to the society, it would be no use. So therefore, it's not just the science, engineering, and technology in all the information technology that we're talking about. There's a very major human element. And this is why major universities, those 200 universities we're talking about, they say the core subjects in any discipline, any technical discipline like engineering. If you want a mechanical engineer of MIT, only 30% will be mechanical. The rest will be all humanities, sciences, and so on. Left to the students to do that. We have not yet learned that because we are being dictated by AICTE or UGC or by university, whatever. You must learn this. That's it. You must ratify this to get through. We have not learned how to correlate them. We have not learned. We think, and I think it's a very serious crisis in many states, including your state, because I've been in the accreditation bodies and so on. Physics, chemistry is gone for the engineers. They think that as useless. The same students who came through JEE, done a lot of physics and chemistry, come through JEE and become engineers, they say no, it is not no use. They are mistaken, totally mistaken. So, and of course, part of that is innovation. Innovation is also based on knowledge. And so these are various dimensions, and I call them convergent dimensions. Today, everybody in the world, major universities talk about convergence. They don't talk about physics, chemistry. In fact, I think in another maybe 15, 20, 30 years, these departments will have no meaning at all. It is what, they may have a different name altogether. I mean, library sciences, for example, already changed. Nobody wants to call it a library anymore. It's a knowledge center now. Okay, so just to elaborate that there are these dimensions, they are convergent. When we talk of innovation, it doesn't mean to say use physics or chemistry, research and so on. It means any aspect or a combination of aspects, be it a research, be it development, be it engineering, maybe manufacturing, maybe a design, maybe even a understanding a customer. What does the customer want? What sort of mobile telephone the customer wants? That is all part of innovation. And to do that, you must know a lot more mechanical, maybe physics, maybe chemistry and so on. Okay. So this is really, okay. And we all talk of research. Research is expensive, yes, because research is the only one which will lead to innovation. And just tell you that there are people, our Chanakya, the 2300 years ago, great political strategist, you know, even he said, Arth Karshya Vidya, create wealth from knowledge. Even he knew that. Research is a transformation of money into knowledge, whereas innovation is a transformation of knowledge to money. So you see, this is a connection between the two. We have to understand that. All of a sudden, we have now talking of innovation. Our Prime Minister, previous Prime Minister talked of innovation. I don't know how many of you know that. He declared the year 2020, decade 2020 to 2020 as the decade of innovation. I don't want to ask you because I've asked at many places here. How many of you know, have you heard of this? Nobody. Very few, very few. We have Innovation Council of India. As I said, we have documents after documents. We have departments after departments. On paper, documents, but nothing more than that. So we have to understand, we have to connect research with innovation. So in a way, this is a cycle. I'm trying to elaborate that, to connect education, higher education with this cycle here. It is a society which pays for education. Certainly this university is paid by the society to learn and to create knowledge. And then it is that education which empowers you, and you should be grateful for that, that you have been empowered as an individual to use that knowledge. And then use that, leverage that power of education. Then the power of education creates knowledge power. Education has no meaning unless you produce a knowledge power. That doesn't mean say knowledge power doesn't mean say you have to have a product and process. You can change the society. You can make people more ethical using these powers. So it could be any one of those aspects. Okay, and the knowledge power, of course, fosters innovations. Innovations create entrepreneurs. Because once there is innovation, there's somebody there ready to say that let me translate that into product, a useful product for the society, for the industry. And of course, entrepreneurs translate and transform in innovation. Transformation process creates wealth and economic growth. The economic growth then creates spirals of inspiration. And that's important to remember. Once that is there, then there are people who are inspired and they aspire more. Somehow or other we forget about this thing. We are only interested in giving you BTechs and MTechs and PhDs or MScs, and beyond that we are not. But we have to understand, it is that there has to be some inspiration. What do you do thereafter with your degree? Inspired then societies, obviously, once they are inspired, then the inspired societies are the one we say, okay, we must invest in education to create knowledge and interest. This is the cycle, I think, our students, our teachers, for example, must understand that. Okay. So in a way, higher education system today in the 21st century, I've already said something about it, but let me put that in a summary here. We have to understand today's economies, lifestyles are so changing so rapidly, and they're more dependent on knowledge. I think most of you, I'm sure, spend, I think, at least half of your life now on Twitters and other things and mobile telephone and so on. That's all knowledge. Ironically, a lot of that knowledge that you use that in Google or something, a lot of that knowledge has been created by our students. Can you imagine, in Stanford has set up the Silicon Valley. In that Silicon Valley, at least 30 to 40% of companies that have been created are by Indians, students, not just IIT. Of course, IITs always claim that we have done it. That's not really fair. Yes, a lot of IITs have done it, but there are a lot of other universities and small colleges have also done that. Under that ecosystem of US or Western countries, okay, they've done it. So, ironically, they are the one who do something there that is put into your applications and your telephones and mobile telephones and then comes to us. We are importing almost materials to assemble 1 billion mobile telephones. We do not produce those materials. We are only imitators and assemblers. And I think we have to keep in mind 1 billion. I mean, no sensible government should have allowed by this time here 1 billion mobile telephones coming from where? A country which was so poor 20 years ago, much poorer than we are, Korea. But anybody who's gone there, Korea, you see how they have used science and technology, not only to produce this, produce automobiles, produce refrigerators, even more important, a country which was begging for rice, produces more rice today and exports it to the rest of the world. Israel, which has no water, most of you don't even know that. Israel has no water, not for even drinking. They buy water from Jordan. Can you imagine that? A country buys water from Jordan for drinking and everything. But they use it so effectively that they produce oranges. Almost 30 to 40% of oranges in Europe are all sold by Israel. It's 7 million people. Just remember that. Because they're entrepreneurs. They're innovators, okay. Therefore, it's important to understand that interaction with our universities, institutions must interact strongly with entrepreneurs, communities, and industry. This has to become an integral part of our higher education. Bookish knowledge cannot do any more of that. Okay, I thought I just quoted Lord Salisbury in England, 2007. It's an important point he's made. Of course, he made that not all universities should be doing only application. I'm not saying that. And he says we are still looking for that key, how to use it. But you know, there's one key which the government of India did not know exists. That's called the IT. IT, information technology, is a lot of people in the world call it Indian technology, because it is Indian. I mean, most of the information technology is coming from India. And the interesting thing is, it is that IT technology that has made us prosperous. That has made your university also prosperous. I can see you have good facilities, excellent facilities, and some of them is the result of that. Imagine we are exporting $120 billion of IT to the world here. That's about over 20-25% of our GDP is because. And we were successful only because the government of India were not knowledgeable, they did not know what the IT people were doing. Murthy was doing all around here, the government did not know, so they did not stop him, they did not put all the rules and regulations. And now when the information technology has gone to 3G stage, the telecommunication, now the government is trying to put limits and restrictions and so on. So this only shows you where the problem is. Wherever the government comes in with ignorance, they are the one who stop these things, okay. And once they become a little too intelligent, looking for a key, they say we cannot find a key, and therefore we'll stop you till we find a key. Okay. So, but we have a lot of advantages. As I said, we earn over under $50 billion today, not only through this IT, but we are doing through pharma also, bio, automobile. So that's a great advantage. And in fact, today we dominate the world today. All these BPOs, KPOs, LPOs, MPOs, VPOs. But unfortunately, these are more like doing a coolie work. In most cases, the coolie work. Well, anyway, coolie also has to exist, and coolie does serve our country very well. We earn a lot of money from this thing. But I think people have recognized today that we are attracting a lot of international companies, and they produce a lot of intellectual property. As I said, GE, IBM, they produce more intellectual property through our students in Bangalore than they are producing in most other countries. Only with the USA, maybe even lesser. So that's why they're coming. They find our students, given the environment, they're very productive. And it's not only that, it's also cost effective. And we also have a clock advantage, time clock advantage. When USA sleeps, we are awake. And we can do the multi-sourcing, and of course we have the demographic advantage. We have a lot of young people. All the politicians talk about demographic advantage, but if you don't give them the advantage to produce something, this demographic advantage will become revolutionary and we'll have problems. We already have problems, a lot of unemployment, okay. So I think we have to understand that everything is moving towards east. There's no doubt about it. I think whether it's China or India, we are big competitors in producing new knowledge and utilizing that knowledge, okay. Okay. So the economics of the knowledge is, of course, I'm going to repeat something. As I said, we are not the only one. All these rich nations that we are talking about, whether it's US, Japan, Germany, South Korea, Taiwan, their economy today is much more dependent on knowledge power. And ironically, they depend more on either the Indians doing their job or Indians buying their products, okay. So I think our billionaires, if you know the number of billionaires in our country is about, I don't know, 25, 30 of them, I think almost 80% of them have been created by this knowledge power. I'm happy to tell you, my students have set up over a dozen companies worldwide, and one student only recently has become a billionaire. So this is after 25 years, that's got an achievement, okay. Okay. So the management people will tell you that the prosperity of a nation is determined by the number of creative and innovative workers. And they like Einstein, so they say it follows the Einstein formula, E equal to mc square, where C is the creativity and M is the number of creative workers. So whether it's essentially it's a sensible formula. The creative workers are more important. Okay. So the question is asked, and the government, as I said, you know, our government had we had an industrial policy science policy in 1958. Well, then new government comes in and says, okay, well, science is not good enough. Let's have a science and industry policy. Well, then they say, that's also not good enough. We'll have a science, industry, and technology policy. Well, that also is not good enough. As I said, we write documents and find out that it's not doing anything. And the latest, last year, Manmohan Singh ji declared we will be a science, technology, and innovation policy. I don't know how many people understand the word innovation, but